The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the penthouse, spraying glass and golden liquid across my bare feet. I stood frozen in the doorway of what should have been my sanctuary, watching my husband's hand slide down the bare back of a woman who could have been my twin. Her auburn hair fell in the same waves I'd spent years perfecting. Her laugh, that crystalline, practice sound, echoed the one I'd trained myself to produce at his business dinners. "Daniel," I whispered, but the word died in the air between us. He turned, and for one terrible moment, I saw genuine confusion flicker across his face, as though he couldn't immediately tell which version of me was real. Then recognition settled in, followed by something worse than guilt, annoyance. "Evelyn, you're home early." The woman, his secretary, I realized with a sick lurch, pulled a silk robe around herself with practiced ease. She didn't look embarrassed, she looked triumphant. "Oh God, Daniel, is this her?" Her voice even had the same slight rasp mine carried after years of presenting cases in court. I'd built my entire life around being perfect for him. 15 years of marriage. I'd softened my ambitions to support his, turned down partnerships to host his dinner parties, sculpted myself into exactly what he said he wanted. And here was my replacement, wearing my face like a costume. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing in the rain outside Belmore and Associates, fumbling with my umbrella and trying to balance a stack of case files, when I first noticed her. She'd been walking into the building's coffee shop, and something about her profile stopped me cold. The resemblance was uncanny enough that a stranger had done a double take, glancing between us. I'd laughed it off then. The city was full of faces. Coincidences happened. Daniel had hired her 2 weeks later. "We need someone sharp in the executive office," he'd explained over dinner at Maria, barely looking up from his phone. "Andrea comes highly recommended. Stanford MBA. Hungry." "Andrea," I'd repeated, testing the name. It sounded softer than mine. More delicate. "You'll like her," he'd assured me. Professional. Discreet. The first time I met her was at the company's spring gala. I'd spent 3 hours getting ready. The emerald Dior gown Daniel had chosen, hair swept up the way he preferred, the diamond necklace he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. I'd felt beautiful, powerful, exactly right. Then I saw her across the ballroom in a dress nearly identical to one I'd worn to a charity auction the previous year, her hair styled precisely as mine had been. She caught my eye and smiled, warm, genuine, completely innocent. "Mrs. Harrison," she'd approached with a champagne flute in hand. "I've heard so much about you. Your work on the Brennan case was absolutely brilliant." She knew my cases. She'd done her research. I'd felt flattered, disarmed. "Thank you, Andrea. Daniel speaks highly of your work as well. He's an incredible mentor." Her hand had brushed his arm as she said it, just briefly, the way I used to touch him when we were young, and I wanted his attention. "I'm learning so much." I should have seen it then. The way his eyes lingered on her profile. The way he leaned in when she spoke, giving her the kind of attention he hadn't given me in years. But I'd been too busy being gracious, being mature, being exactly the kind of wife who trusted her husband. The humiliations had started small. Dinner reservations canceled because Daniel had client meetings that ran late. Weekend getaways postponed because the office was slammed. He'd come home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, the same Jo Malone scent I wore, and when I'd mentioned it, he'd laughed. "The whole office uses it. Andrea keeps it in the bathroom for clients." Then there were the changes in our intimate life. He'd started asking me to wear my hair down, though he'd always preferred it up, to speak more softly, to laugh differently. He was redesigning me, I realized later, trying to transform me into the version of myself that had walked through his office door with fresh ambition and wide eyes. "I'm not her," I'd said one night, 6 weeks before I found them together. We'd been getting ready for bed, and he'd made a comment about my courtroom voice being too sharp. "What are you talking about?" He'd looked genuinely confused. "Andrea, I'm not your secretary." His face had closed like a door slamming. "You're being paranoid, Evelyn. And frankly, it's beneath you." That had stung worse than confirmation would have. He'd made me feel crazy for seeing what was directly in front of me. Gaslighting, my therapist friend Karen would have called it, but I hadn't wanted to admit I needed that vocabulary yet. The morning I'd found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, the Pierre, a suite, champagne service, I'd finally let myself know what I'd been refusing to see. I'd called the office to say I needed to work from home, then I'd driven to the penthouse we kept in the city for late work nights. The doorman had looked uncomfortable when I'd asked if Daniel was upstairs. I believe Mr. Harrison has a guest, ma'am. I'm sure he won't mind, I'd said with a smile that felt like broken glass in my mouth. Now, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I watched Andrea tighten the robe. My robe, I noticed, the one I kept hanging in the closet. Daniel stepped between us as though he could physically separate the before and after of this moment. Let me explain, he started. Explain what? My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, I was fragmenting. Explain why your secretary is wearing my face? Or explain why you're betraying 15 years of marriage in our bed? Andrea's expression shifted then, something ugly flickering beneath the surface. Our bed? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Daniel, you said you were separated. That the marriage was over except for paperwork. That cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He'd rewritten our history for her. In his version, I was already gone, already irrelevant. The divorce was a formality, and she was the new chapter, not the affair. We're not separated, I said, looking at her directly. We had dinner together last night. I ironed his shirt this morning. We have a vacation planned to Tuscany next month. Her face went white. Good. Let her feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. Daniel's jaw clenched. Evelyn, this isn't the time or place. When exactly would be the right time? Daniel, were you planning to schedule it in your calendar? Tuesday, 3 p.m. Destroy wife's entire life? Don't be dramatic. His voice had that edge it got when I wasn't performing the role he'd assigned me. This marriage has been dead for years. You know it. I know it. We've been going through the motions. Had we? I'd thought we were solid, stable. Yes, the passion had cooled, but that was normal after 15 years. We had partnership, history, shared investments. We had a life. But standing there, seeing the way he positioned himself between me and his younger, hungrier copy, I realized he'd been building an exit for months, maybe years, and he'd found the perfect replacement, someone who looked like me but still gazed at him with admiration, who hadn't yet learned all the ways he'd disappointed. I want you out, I said quietly. Both of you. Now. Andrea grabbed her clothes from the bedroom, my bedroom, moving with quick, efficient movements that suggested this wasn't her first time navigating the apartment. She'd been here before, many times, living in my space, wearing my life like borrowed clothes. As she passed me, she paused. For what it's worth, I didn't know he was lying about the separation. But you knew he was married. She had the grace to look away. Yes. Did he tell you why he hired you? Did he explain that you look exactly like me? Or did you both pretend that was just a coincidence? Her silence was answer enough. After they left, Daniel promising we'd talk about this rationally once I'd calmed down, I stood in the empty penthouse and let myself shatter. I cried until my throat was raw, until the sunrise painted the skyline gold and pink, until I had no more tears left. Then I called my lawyer. Margaret Chen had been my mentor when I'd first started practicing family law, before I'd shifted to corporate work to support Daniel's business interests. She was brilliant, ruthless, and she owed me several favors from cases I'd referred her way over the years. Evelyn, she answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the early hour. What's wrong? I told her everything. The affair, the resemblance, the gaslighting, the years I'd spent building his empire while my own ambitions withered. When I finished, there was a long silence. How detailed are your financial records? She finally asked. Extremely. I handled all our accounts. Good. Don't delete anything. Don't confront him again. And Evelyn? We're going to destroy him. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. Cold, strategic, focused. Every morning I woke up, did my makeup with precision, dressed in the armor of expensive suits, and went to war. Margaret helped me pull every thread. Daniel's company, Harrison Digital Solutions, looked successful from the outside, gleaming offices, impressive client roster, regular features in business magazines. But underneath, it was a house of cards held together by my family's money and connections. My father had provided the initial capital. My uncle had introduced Daniel to his first major clients. My own legal expertise had navigated him through 2 potentially devastating lawsuits. I'd been so focused on being supportive that I'd never stopped to calculate what I'd actually contributed. Now I did, and the number was staggering. You have leverage, Margaret explained over coffee in her corner office. Significant leverage. Your family's investment firm is his largest stakeholder. You personally own 30% of the company. It was an anniversary gift, remember? I'd forgotten. He'd made such a show of it. calling it a romantic gesture, binding our lives together. Now I saw it for what it was, a way to keep me invested, literally and figuratively, in his success. What about Andrea? I asked. The question tasted bitter. Margaret's smile was sharp. What about her? She's an at-will employee who engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a married executive. That's a liability, not an asset. While Margaret crafted the legal strategy, I did my own investigation. It turned out Andrea hadn't just stumbled into resembling me, she'd cultivated it. Her social media from 2 years ago showed a completely different woman. Blonde, different style, different presence. She'd transformed herself deliberately. I found the Instagram account she'd started following 8 months before Daniel hired her. Mine. She'd studied my posts, the restaurants I loved, the designers I wore, the way I styled my hair. She'd reverse-engineered me and presented Daniel with a younger, more malleable version. The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. Karen, my therapist friend, came over one night with wine and takeout. "You're holding up remarkably well," she observed, watching me sort through financial documents with mechanical precision. "I'm not holding up. I'm holding on." I took a long sip of wine. "There's a difference. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what he's losing." The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. Daniel had been strutting around the office for weeks, confident and untouchable, Andrea at his side like a trained puppy. He'd moved into a hotel, not the Pierre. I'd made sure that was no longer an option through some strategic conversations with the management, and was already talking about making the separation official. "We can be adults about this," he'd said during our one stilted phone conversation. "Split things fairly. Stay civil." I'd agreed, letting him think I was beaten, compliant, the good wife even in divorce. The boardroom of Harrison Digital Solutions occupied the top floor of their downtown office building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. Daniel had chosen the space specifically for its power, its ability to intimidate. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my most severe suit, black Armani, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. Margaret was already there, her briefcase open, documents arranged with military precision. Daniel walked in with Andrea behind him, and I watched his confident stride falter when he saw us. "Evelyn, I didn't realize you'd be attending." As a 30% stakeholder and the representative of the primary investment firm, my attendance is mandatory. I kept my voice professional, empty of emotion. "Please, sit down." The rest of the board filed in. Daniel's business partner Marcus, the CFO, 2 outside investors, and my Uncle Robert, who'd helped fund Daniel's initial expansion. Uncle Robert caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. We'd had a long conversation 2 days ago. He was not pleased about how Daniel had treated his niece. "Before we begin with the quarterly review," I said, standing up, "I'd like to address a significant matter affecting the company's leadership and liability exposure." Daniel's face went carefully blank. "Evelyn, if this is about our personal situation, this is about company finances, executive conduct, and fiduciary responsibility." I nodded to Margaret, who began distributing folders to each board member. "As you'll see in the documentation, there are several concerning issues that require immediate attention." I watched them open the folders, saw the moment comprehension dawned. Andrea's face drained of color. "First," I continued, "there's the matter of an inappropriate relationship between the CEO and his executive secretary, which creates significant HR liability. Mr. Harrison has been conducting an affair with an employee who reports directly to him, including the use of company resources, corporate cards for hotel stays, company vehicles, even company-paid travel that was falsely reported as business expenses." Daniel stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. This is a personal vendetta." "Sit down, Daniel." Uncle Robert's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let her finish." "Second, there's the issue of financial mismanagement. Over the past 3 years, approximately $2 million in company funds has been redirected through various accounts for personal use. Renovation of the penthouse that was listed as a company property, but is actually owned personally by Mr. Harrison. A boat purchase classified as a client entertainment expense. The list goes on. Marcus, Daniel's partner, was staring at the documents with growing horror. "Daniel, tell me this isn't accurate. It's a misunderstanding of our accounting." "It's fraud," Margaret interjected calmly, "and we have 3 years of documentation to prove it." I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Third, and most relevant to the board's fiduciary duty, There's the matter of my family's investment and my personal stake in this company. My father's initial capital of $5 million was provided with specific terms that required mutual agreement for any major structural changes. My 30% ownership gives me significant voting power, and the intellectual property I developed for 3 of your largest contracts is actually owned by me personally, not the company. Daniel's confident mask was cracking. You can't do this. I already have. I closed my folder with a soft snap. Here's what's going to happen. Daniel Harrison will resign as CEO effective immediately. The company will be restructured with new leadership. I recommend Marcus for the position, assuming he wasn't aware of these financial irregularities. I looked at Marcus, who shook his head vigorously. Ms. Andrea Collins will be terminated for cause, with no severance, for her role in the misuse of company resources and violation of workplace conduct policies. A full audit will be conducted, and Mr. Harrison will repay all misappropriated funds or face criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. This is insane. Andrea's voice was shrill, the polished secretary persona shattering. Daniel, you said we'd be fine. You said the company was yours. Shut up, he hissed at her, and I saw her flinch. So that's how he treated her when things didn't go his way? How long before she would have become another version of me, criticized, controlled, eventually replaced? Uncle Robert spoke up. The investment firm will be conducting its own review. Based on what I'm seeing here, we'll be restructuring the terms of our continued support. Daniel, you'll be lucky if we don't pull out entirely. The vote was swift and unanimous. Daniel was out. Andrea was out. I retained my ownership stake but agreed to step back from active involvement. I had my own career to rebuild, after all. As the meeting adjourned, Daniel tried to corner me by the elevators. You've destroyed everything we built. No, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I built it. You just took credit. And now you're facing the consequences of treating people as disposable. This is about revenge. You're bitter because I moved on. The laugh that escaped me was genuine, sharp with relief. Daniel, you didn't move on. You tried to replace me with a cheaper model and thought I wouldn't notice. That's not moving on. That's being too lazy and unimaginative to actually grow as a person. Andrea was crying in the lobby when I passed through. Her perfectly styled hair, my hair, was coming undone, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She looked up at me with something like desperation. I didn't know, she said, about the money, about any of it. He told me you were separated. He said you were cold, that you'd stopped loving him years ago. He lied to both of us, I said, and surprised myself by feeling a flicker of sympathy. But you made choices too. You knew he was married. You deliberately made yourself look like me. You participated in erasing me. I thought if I was everything you weren't, younger, more agreeable, more supportive, he'd choose me. He didn't choose you, Andrea. He chose a fantasy. And fantasies are exhausting to maintain. Eventually, you would have become too real, too complex, too human. And he would have found another girl to renovate into his ideal woman. She stared at me, and I saw the moment it landed, the recognition that she'd been a pawn, not a partner. What happens to me now? She whispered. You figure out who you actually are. Not who you thought Daniel wanted. Not who you thought you needed to be. Just you. I paused at the door. And Andrea? Change your hair. Find your own face. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Daniel fought me on everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on, designed to protect his assets, worked against him spectacularly when Margaret proved that most of those assets had been built with my family's money and my professional contributions. I walked away with a settlement that made Margaret whistle low under her breath. The penthouse, 40% of his remaining liquid assets, maintenance of my lifestyle for 5 years, and most satisfying, I retained my company shares, which meant I'd have a vote in every major decision for the foreseeable future. More importantly, I walked away with myself. I started practicing family law again, taking on cases for women navigating divorce, helping them understand their worth in the rubble of their marriages. The work was raw and difficult and deeply satisfying in ways my corporate practice had never been. Karen and I started a support group for women rebuilding after betrayal. It met every Thursday evening in a community center downtown, and the first meeting drew 40 women. They all had different stories, affairs, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, but the same haunted look of having invested everything in someone who'd treated them as expendable. The worst part, one woman said, voice trembling, is that I still love him. After everything, I still love him. Love isn't a switch, I told her gently. You can love someone and still know that being with them will destroy you. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Daniel at a charity gala. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked diminished somehow. Older. The confidence that had always defined him replaced by something harder and more desperate. He was with a new woman, brunette this time, clinging to his arm with the same adoring gaze Andrea had once had. He saw me across the room and approached, leaving his date at the bar. Evelyn, you look well. I am well. And I meant it. The weight I'd carried for years, the constant anxiety about being enough, being perfect, being whatever he needed, had lifted. I felt lighter, sharper, more fundamentally myself than I had in over a decade. I've been thinking about what you said, about me not actually growing. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. You were right. About a lot of things. That must have been difficult to admit. Don't be smug. It doesn't suit you. The old Evelyn would have apologized, softened, made him comfortable. The new Evelyn just smiled. Actually, I think it suits me perfectly. He glanced back at his date, and I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or recognition. She's nothing like you. I made sure of that. Daniel, that was never the problem. The problem was that you wanted a person you could control, not a partner you could grow with. Until you figure that out, every relationship you have will end the same way. And you're happy now? Being alone? I'm not alone. I have friends, purpose, myself. I touched his arm briefly, surprised to find I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a sort of distant pity. I'm complete, Daniel. I wasn't, when I was with you. I'd made myself incomplete to fit into the space you'd designed. That's not love. That's architecture. I left him standing there and rejoined Karen and the group of women from our Thursday meetings. We'd all come together, supporting each other's presence at an event that would have intimidated us individually. Strength in numbers, yes. But more than that, strength in recognition. We saw each other clearly, without the distortions of abusive relationships and diminished expectations. 3 months later, I got an email from Andrea. The subject line read, "Apology and update. Dear Evelyn, I've been in therapy since everything fell apart. It took a long time for me to see clearly what I'd done, not just to you, but to myself. I molded myself into what I thought a man wanted, and in the process, I lost everything authentic about who I was. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that watching you walk away with your dignity intact taught me more about strength than anything else in my life. You didn't let him destroy you. You destroyed the version of yourself that existed for him, and you built something real in its place. I'm going back to school. Psychology, maybe social work. I want to help young women avoid the mistakes I made, and I dyed my hair black. It's closer to my natural color. I'm trying to find my own face, like you said. Thank you for not destroying me when you had every right to. Thank you for seeing me as a person, even when I'd forgotten how to see myself, Andrea." I read the email 3 times, then saved it in a folder I titled Growth. She was right about one thing. I had destroyed something. But it wasn't her, and it wasn't Daniel. It was the performance of perfection I'd maintained for so long, the exhausting pretense that I could be everything to someone who would never see me as enough. That evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, my new apartment, my own space, full of colors and textures I'd chosen without consulting anyone, and studied my reflection. Auburn hair, yes, but I'd cut it shorter, layers framing my face differently. The same green eyes, but they looked sharper now, more awake. The same face I'd been born with, but somehow new, reclaimed. Behind me on the counter sat my phone, open to a text thread with the Thursday group. We were planning a trip to Italy, Tuscany, actually, the vacation Daniel and I had never taken. But this time it would be 6 women celebrating survival and reinvention, not a desperate attempt to save a dying marriage. I thought about the version of myself who'd stood in that penthouse doorway, watching her husband with her replacement, and felt a surge of gratitude for her. She'd shattered, yes, but she'd been brave enough to pick up the pieces and build something new, something that belonged only to her. The story of betrayal. People always want to know if there's a moment of dramatic confrontation, a final showdown where the villain realizes what they've lost. But real life isn't that neat. Daniel continued his pattern. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd broken up with the brunette and was dating someone new, younger again, eager again. Andrea really did go back to school and seemed genuinely committed to changing. And me? I won a major case defending a woman whose husband had tried to hide assets during their divorce. I published an article about financial abuse in marriages that went viral. I learned to salsa dance just because it looked fun. I adopted a rescue dog who had terrible separation anxiety and required patience I didn't know I had. I built a life that was mine. Unedited, unperformed, real. Late one night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the journal my therapist had recommended I keep during the divorce. I flipped through pages of grief, rage, confusion, slowly giving way to clarity and purpose. On the last page, I wrote, "In the end, he didn't destroy me. He freed me. By choosing someone who looked like me but wasn't, he showed me that he'd never seen me at all, just the role I played. The greatest gift anyone can give you is the chance to stop pretending, even if it comes wrapped in betrayal. I am not the woman who stood frozen in that doorway. She died that night, and someone stronger was born. Someone who knows her worth isn't determined by who chooses her, but by who she chooses to be. This is what survival looks like. Not revenge, though that had its place. Not bitterness, though I earned the right. But choice. Active, intentional choice to become more myself every single day." Thank you, Daniel, for making it impossible to keep performing. Thank you, Andrea, for holding up a mirror, literally, and showing me what hollowness looks like. Thank you to every person who saw my pain and helped me remember I was more than my marriage. And thank you to myself for refusing to disappear. I closed the journal and looked out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably repeating his patterns. Andrea was probably struggling through her transformation. The world kept turning, people kept hurting each other and healing and hurting again. But here, in this moment, in this space I'd claimed for myself, I was complete. And that, I realized, was the only revenge that truly mattered, not destroying him, but building myself into someone he could never diminish again. Someone who looked like me not because she was trying to become me, but because she finally, gloriously was.